Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the veils of time, where fact and legend intertwine, and whispers of ancient knights echo through the forests and coastlines of the New World. As you rest and prepare to drift into sleep, allow your mind to voyage gently through the mysteries of the past. Tonight, we ask a question wrapped in secrecy and shadow. Did the Knights Templar truly reach America? Centuries before Columbus, was their presence myth, or could it possibly be truth? Let us begin at the dawn of the Templar Order. 1. The rise and fall of the Templars. The year was 1119. In a world still echoing with the clamor of crusades and the fervor of sacred war, a group of men gathered not for conquest or for riches, but for a cause they deemed holy. In the rubble and relics of Jerusalem, 9 knights, humble yet resolute, took an oath of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They pledged themselves to protect Christian pilgrims making their way to the Holy Land, a journey fraught with danger and ambush. These men, calling themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, would soon be known by another name, a name that would carry through the centuries like the toll of a distant bell. The Knights Templar. They began as guardians of a road, but they became guardians of a secret. In time, their mission expanded. Their wealth grew, not through pillage or royal favor, but through discipline, trade, and trust. Their presence spanned kingdoms. Their symbols adorned castles and chapels, and their influence reached far beyond the walls of any temple. They built fortresses upon sacred hills, forged bonds with monarchs, and formed one of the earliest and most effective financial networks in Europe. Through a rudimentary form of banking, pilgrims and nobles could deposit wealth in one city and retrieve it in another, safeguarded by the authority of the temple. And yet, they remained cloaked in silence. Their rights were private, their hierarchy complex, their loyalty absolute. In the eyes of the common folk, they were somewhere between monks and knights, warriors and mystics, men and shadows. Their white mantles, emblazoned with a red cross, came to evoke both awe and dread. Tales emerged, tales of a hidden relic, an object unearthed beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple, too sacred or too dangerous to name aloud. Some whispered it was the Holy Grail. Others claimed it was the Ark of the Covenant, or documents that could unravel the very foundation of the church itself. Whatever they carried, whatever truth they found, it remained sealed within the walls of their preceptories and their hearts. And as the decades passed, their influence only deepened. By the 13th century, they had become a power unto themselves, answering not to kings but to the Pope. They were independent, disciplined, and loyal only to their Grand Master in Jerusalem and the successor of St. Peter in Rome. They were men who bowed to none, not even to the crowns that ruled the earth. But power is a jealous thing, and influence seldom escapes envy. In the gilded halls of Paris, a king grew restless. Philip IV of France, beset by debt and wary of the Templars' autonomy, began to weave a web. His coffers had been drained by war and extravagance. His grip on the French clergy was tightening. But the Templars, wealthy, secretive, untouchable, stood apart, and he could not suffer it. On a cold October morning in the year 1307, the hammer fell. Across France, Templars were arrested in a single, coordinated sweep. They were seized from their beds, their commanderies, their chapels. Accusations were flung like stones: heresy, idolatry, blasphemy. They were charged with worshipping strange idols, with spitting upon the cross, with dark rituals performed behind locked doors. Torture yielded confessions. Under agony, even the devout may whisper what they never believed. The Pope, cornered by politics and pressure, dissolved the order in 1312. Its lands were divided, its holdings scattered, its men imprisoned or burned. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was led to the stake in 1314. As the flames licked at his flesh, he is said to have cursed the king and the pope, summoning them to judgment before the year was out. And indeed, both men perished shortly thereafter. Whether it was fate or vengeance, no one could say. But not all Templars burned. Not all vanished into dungeons or gave up their secrets. Some escaped, some fled north. Some changed their names, their garments, their vows, and some, legend says, took to the sea. From the port of La Rochelle, ships are said to have slipped into the mist, heavy with cargo, swift with purpose. These were not vessels of retreat, but of continuation. Their holds may have carried not only men, but relics, grails, scrolls, gold, and perhaps even truths too great to be confined to Europe. They sailed into exile, not with despair, but with mission. And so the question begins, the question that has echoed for centuries across the waves and the woods. Where did they go? Some say they made for Scotland, where Robert the Bruce stood defiant against papal edicts, a land beyond Rome's reach. Others believe they journeyed further still, to Iceland, to Greenland and beyond, to a new world untouched by crusade or crown, a land of rivers and rock, of sky and silence, a place where secrets could be kept and seeds of something new might take root. This is where the myth begins to shimmer. For what if the Templars, with their ships and their maps and their knowledge of navigation gleaned from east and west, reached the shores of what we now call America? What if the forests of Nova Scotia, the cliffs of New England, the river valleys of the north were once walked by those who had once walked the halls of Solomon's temple? There are clues, scattered like stardust, stones with carvings, towers without explanation, crosses in places no cross should be, runes etched into rock not by local hand, oral traditions from peoples who speak of pale strangers from the sea, clad in armor, bearing symbols of the cross. Some of these tales are dismissed, of course, as fantasy, as coincidence, as imagination reaching beyond its grasp, but others remain unsolved, unrepudiated, and stubbornly strange. The Templar story does not end in fire. It trails off into shadow. It vanishes into waves and whispers, into fragments of stone and folds of parchment, into dreams of ships that sailed west, never to return or perhaps never to report. It is in this silence, this in-between place, that the mind begins to wander, not with the urgency of proof, but with the calm wonder of possibility. For if even a fraction of the Templar legend is true, if even one ship reached a foreign shore, if even one knight stepped onto untrodden earth, then history is not a closed book, but a living scroll, one we are still unraveling, line by line. So as you lay now, eyes closed, the world fading around you, imagine the red cross fluttering in a breeze unfamiliar, sails cutting across the ocean, bearing a truth not yet ready to be found. Imagine secrets not lost, but waiting. Imagine that the story, like the night, still rides. And in the stillness of night, as sleep carries you beyond the veil, let the question remain not as a puzzle to solve, but as a tale to dream. 2. The Lost Fleet and the Westward Escape. When silence fell across France on the morning of October 13th, 1307, it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something hidden, something moved in secret, just before the storm. All across the kingdom, the men of the Knights Templar were arrested in a coordinated sweep. The king's agents struck fast and without warning, pulling men from beds and chapels, extinguishing candles that had burned for 2 centuries. But while the prisons of Paris filled, a different kind of story began to unfold in a quiet harbor along the Atlantic. A story not of capture, but of disappearance. La Rochelle, the great port city of the Templars, once bustled with the sound of salt-stained sails and the creak of cargo-laden ships. It was here, along France's western coast, that the Templars had anchored their naval presence. Dozens of vessels were known to be stationed at La Rochelle in the weeks leading up to the arrests. But when the king's men arrived to seize the fleet, it was gone. No confrontation, no resistance, just absence. A fleet of ships vanished without a trace, slipping into legend. Where did they go? Some believe the fleet sailed north towards Scotland, a land excommunicated by the Church, where papal authority could not so easily follow. There, the Templars may have found refuge among the supporters of Robert the Bruce, the rebel king who stood defiant against both English crown and Roman decree. According to whispered lore, it was in Scotland that the Templars fought one final battle, not against an enemy, but for an ally. Some say their cavalry appeared like ghosts on the fields of Bannockburn in 1314, turning the tide of war in Scotland's favor before disappearing once more into the mists. But others say the ships did not sail north. They say the ships turned west. This theory is stranger, bolder, more defiant of the known maps of the medieval world, but it is also the most enduring. According to this idea, the Templars sailed not for safety, but for destiny, guided by knowledge older than kingdoms and charts older than cathedrals. Charts, perhaps, gathered in the East during the Crusades from Arab mariners, Jewish scholars, or Byzantine libraries. Charts that whispered of a vast land across the sea, untouched by the Pope's reach, beyond the grasp of kings. Could they have sailed to America? It is not as implausible as it sounds. Medieval sailors, though lacking in modern instruments, were not blind. They navigated by stars, by currents, by instinct. The Vikings had already crossed the Atlantic centuries earlier, reaching Newfoundland and Greenland. Their sagas spoke of a place called Vinland, a place with grapes and meadows and forests, far from Iceland's ice. And if the Vikings had crossed, could not others? Among those who find truth in this theory, one name rises above the rest: Prince Henry Sinclair of Orkney. He was a Scottish nobleman of Norse descent, and a man some believe to have been entrusted with knowledge passed down from the remnants of the Templar order. His story, preserved in fragments and disputed accounts, tells of a voyage around 1398, long after the suppression of the Templars, but still within reach of their memory. It is said that Sinclair sailed from the Orkney Islands across the sea to Nova Scotia, possibly accompanied by descendants of the Templar escapees, or perhaps by their ideals carried forward in secret. If Sinclair reached the shores of North America, he did not arrive to conquer, but to observe, to mark, perhaps to plant the seeds of something sacred. Stone markers, symbols carved into trees, a legacy not shouted but whispered, and then, like a shadow, he returned or vanished. There are those who believe the Templars themselves, years earlier, may have preceded even Sinclair, that their lost fleet did not vanish into the depths of the sea, but landed on the shores of what we now call Canada or New England, that they brought with them not armies, but relics, not conquest, but concealment. Nova Scotia, particularly Oak Island, has long drawn such speculation. It is a small island riddled with legends, where treasure hunters have for over 2 centuries dug in search of a mystery few can fully explain. Wooden platforms, tunnels with traps, stone markers with strange carvings. All seem to hint at something deliberately hidden. Among the most popular theories is that the Templars buried something of great importance there: gold, documents, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. Other signs dot the coastline further south, in Maine, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, crosses carved into stone, mysterious buildings with no clear origin, names that echo Latin and Old French, etched long before colonial settlers officially arrived. Some Native American tribes even carry oral traditions of pale-skinned visitors who arrived long ago, who carried weapons but also knowledge, who built, taught, and then disappeared without violence. And still, the critics demand evidence. Where are the documents? Where are the bodies? Where are the tools, the coins, the records? But absence of proof is not always proof of absence. Sometimes, what is lost is not lost by accident. Sometimes, it is hidden by design. It is possible the Templars did not come to build an empire, but to protect a secret, a lineage, a treasure, a tradition. If they arrived, perhaps they stayed only long enough to do what they came to do, and then moved on, erasing their trail behind them. Perhaps they became part of the land. Perhaps they returned across the ocean. Or perhaps they simply vanished as quietly as they had sailed. And so we are left with fragments, not firm answers, but impressions. A fleet that disappeared, a prince who sailed, stones that do not belong, stories that don't align, and through it all, the whisper of a name: Templar. It is said that truth is stranger than fiction, but truth is also quieter. It does not always leave monuments. Sometimes it leaves only questions. And sometimes those questions live longer than any empire. Tonight, let the image stay with you. The white sails of a lost fleet rising against a gray Atlantic sky, slipping beyond the edge of the map. A compass held steady by hands sworn to secrecy. And below deck, not riches, but something greater, a legacy carried across the water, seeking refuge not from men, but from time. Let that mystery be your companion as you fall asleep. For though we may never know exactly where the fleet went, we know it went somewhere. And in the silence it left behind, we are invited to wonder. And wondering, perhaps, is the oldest kind of prayer. 3. The mystery of the Newport Tower. There is a place in New England where time seems to fold upon itself, where stone rises from the earth like a memory that refuses to fade. In the coastal town of Newport, Rhode Island, surrounded by colonial houses and paved roads, stands a structure that has no name, no author, no certain date. The locals call it the Old Stone Mill. Others call it the Newport Tower. But to those who pause and truly look, who breathe with the stones and listen to the silence within, it is something far more haunting, a question built in stone. The tower stands quietly on a gentle hill in Turo Park, round and weathered, its walls made of rough fieldstone and mortar, its arches both graceful and strange. It has 8 legs, thick stone columns supporting the circular upper chamber, and small windows that face specific points on the compass, as if aligning not just with direction, but with something deeper: the passage of light, the motion of stars, the breath of seasons. At first glance it seems out of place, as though plucked from a European hillside and dropped gently into American soil. Mainstream history tells us this, that the structure was a windmill, built in the mid-1600s by Governor Benedict Arnold, the great-grandfather of the revolutionary trader of the same name. The will of this earlier Arnold describes "my stone-built windmill," and many historians point to this line as the end of all debate. A windmill it was, simple, colonial, functional. But there are some things that resist simple answers, and the Newport Tower, despite its silence, resists. Its proportions are not typical of windmills in colonial New England. Its arches do not mimic the square or timber frameworks one might expect. Instead, they resemble the Romanesque arches found in medieval churches, particularly those constructed by a certain military order in Europe, the Knights Templar. And that is where the legend begins to stir. What if the tower predates colonial Newport? What if it was already standing when the settlers arrived? What if Governor Arnold's stone-built windmill was not a structure he commissioned, but one he inherited? These questions are not born from fancy alone. They arise from anomalies, from things that do not fit. Researchers have noted the striking architectural similarities between the Newport Tower and Templar-round churches in Europe, especially in Tomar, Portugal, and parts of Scotland. These churches were circular in design, with central supports and arches resembling those of the tower. They were often aligned with solar events, solstices, and equinoxes, and infused with layers of sacred geometry. The Templars, influenced by Eastern knowledge during the Crusades, became known not just for martial prowess, but for esoteric learning, astronomy, symbolism, geometry, and architecture that sought to reflect the harmony of the divine. If the Newport Tower is a reflection of that philosophy, it raises a compelling question. Who could have built it, and when? Danish antiquarian Carl Christian Raffin proposed in the early 1800s that the tower was of Norse origin, possibly built by Viking explorers long before Columbus. His theory gained traction in Europe, and for a time, the tower was seen as evidence of Norse exploration of North America. But over time, that theory too fell out of academic favor, lacking concrete artifacts, firm dates, or records. But what if the Vikings were not alone? What if they brought others with them, or if others came in their wake? There is a shadowed theory, whispered among esoteric historians and Templar enthusiasts, that connects the Newport Tower to a voyage shrouded in legend, the alleged journey of Prince Henry Sinclair of Scotland. Around the year 1398, nearly a century before, Columbus Sinclair is said to have led an expedition across the Atlantic, possibly in partnership with Norse descendants, possibly accompanied by members of the disbanded Knights Templar. The story tells of Sinclair reaching Nova Scotia and then traveling south along the coast, leaving marks and signs of present stone carvings, encoded maps, structures built in silence. Could the Newport Tower be one of those signs? Those who believe point to more than architecture. They speak of alignments of how, on the winter solstice, the rising sun shines directly through the tower's southern window, illuminating the opposite side in a way that seems intentional. They speak of lunar patterns and geometric ratios encoded in the tower's dimensions. They cite the lack of mortar consistency with known colonial practices, the presence of carbon traces in lower layers suggesting earlier burning or habitation. But most of all, they point to a feeling, the sense that the tower is older than the town around it, that it belongs to a different story. Inside the tower, if you stand still long enough, you can hear echoes. Not the sounds of machinery or grinding stone, no blades ever turned here, no wheat ever ground. Instead, there is a hush, a kind of breathless quiet, as though waiting. The stone columns rise like sentinels, and the round chamber above feels more like a chapel than a windmill. There is reverence here, not industry. Skeptics, of course, offer counterpoints. They note that circular stone mills did exist in parts of England. They point out that the earliest European settlers did bring with them old-world designs. They argue that the Templar connection is romantic but unsubstantiated. There are no documents, no inscriptions, no undeniable proof that links the tower to medieval Europe. And in the world of academic history, absence of evidence is often the final word. But history is more than documents. It is also memory, symbol, resonance. Some truths do not announce themselves. They linger in architecture, in orientation, in the persistence of mystery. The Newport Tower, whatever its origin, continues to draw questions. And perhaps that is its purpose, not to declare, but to invite. Could it be that a group of exiled builders seeking sanctuary in a new world raised this structure as a place of quiet worship? Could it be that encoded in the arches and shadows are messages meant only for the initiated guardians of a secret lineage? Or perhaps it is simpler still, a monument to survival, to a voyage made in desperation and hope, to the persistence of an ideal. No matter its origin, the tower endures. It has seen the rise and fall of empires, revolutions, storms, and silence. It has watched children grow old and old men pass away. It has stood while stories changed around it, and still it waits. On some nights when the wind moves through the arches and the moonlight gathers softly on the stones, one might almost see figures standing among the columns, cloaked in robes, whispering prayers in languages lost. One might almost hear footsteps circling the structure, as if in ritual, as if in remembrance. But then again, it may just be the wind, or the weight of dreams. As you rest now, let the image of the Newport Tower settle in your thoughts. A quiet shape beneath the stars. A puzzle without edges. A chapter left unwritten. And in the stillness between breath and sleep, ask yourself, what stories do the stones remember? What hands laid them, and why? Perhaps one day we'll know, or perhaps some stories were never meant to be explained, only honored. The Westford Knight and Kensington Runestone. There are moments in history when the land itself seems to whisper, not with words but with stone, with quiet carvings left behind by hands we do not know, telling stories no book records. These are not loud declarations, nor monuments that boast. They are fragments, small, weathered, and strange. Yet they hold a kind of weight that lingers. Tonight, we turn to two such fragments. One lies in Massachusetts, the other in Minnesota. Both etched in stone, both shrouded in mystery, and both perhaps tied to the same vanished thread. The journey of men who crossed the ocean long before the maps admitted it possible. Let us begin in Westford, Massachusetts. It is a quiet town now. Trees rise along old colonial roads, and the wind carries the same hush that once moved through forests untouched by European boots. Yet hidden near a residential street, there is a ledge of stone, a simple outcropping, easily overlooked. Upon it is a carving, faint, almost vanishing, unless traced with care and imagination. It appears to be a figure, a human shape, lying as if in rest or memorial. Some say it wears a sword, others see a shield. The local name for it is clear and evocative, the Westford Knight. According to legend, the carving is not a coincidence of nature or an idle colonial creation. It is a grave marker, a memorial left for a fallen knight who came not from Plymouth or Jamestown, but from across the sea, perhaps centuries earlier. The story speaks of Sir James Gunn, a Scottish nobleman said to have traveled to the New World with Prince Henry Sinclair in the late 14th century. If true, then this knight would have fallen far from home, in a land not yet colonized, not yet named. And so, his companions, if the story holds, carved his likeness into the stone, leaving behind a quiet tribute. Knowing that no priest would come, no funeral would be held, no bell would toll. Just this image, cut into rock, to say, someone was here, and someone is gone. Skeptics have examined the carving and offered alternate explanations. They say the figure is imagined, shaped by centuries of erosion and wishful tracing. They note the lack of documentation, the absence of any direct link to Sinclair or Gunn. But the carving remains, and so does the story. And stories once believed are not so easily erased. Now let us drift west far from the coastal towns of New England, across rivers and fields, through forests thick with memory until we arrive in the heart of Minnesota. In the town of Kensington, a farmer once turned over the soil of his land, clearing trees, preparing his fields. And there, tangled in roots, he found a stone. It was large and rectangular, worn but solid. Upon its face, strange marks. Not English, not Latin. Runes, Old Norse runes, carved with purpose, telling a story from a time long before settlers arrived. The inscription, translated with care, tells of a journey. 8 Gotalanders and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland to the west. We had a camp by 2 shelters 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were out fishing, When we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and dead. AVM, save us from evil. Below, it gives a date, the year, 1362. It is called the Kensington Runestone, and its discovery in 1898 sparked a debate that continues to this day. Some scholars declared it a hoax crafted by the farmer or someone he knew. They pointed to linguistic inconsistencies, to rune forms that did not appear in medieval inscriptions. Others rushed to defend it, noting obscure dialects and grammar patterns from rural Sweden and Norway, arguing that the stone's details could not have been faked by an uneducated farmer in the 19th century. But beyond the academic debates lies a simple question. What if it's real? What if, in 1362, a group of Norse explorers did travel deep into the heart of North America, navigating rivers and lakes, seeking the unknown? And what if they were not alone? The connection to the Templars may seem distant, but the thread is there. Some believe that the Norse explorers were not acting on their own, but were in contact with exiled groups from Europe, men who had reasons to hide, reasons to carry relics or knowledge away from the world they left behind. In this theory, the Norse and the Templars are not separated by culture, but joined by mission, both navigating by ancient charts, both seeking refuge, both leaving behind stone evidence that would one day confound and captivate. The Kensington Runestone and the Westford Knight together, they form a pattern. A knight carved in Massachusetts, a runic tale in Minnesota. Both predate Columbus. Both speak of voyages into a land not yet drawn on European maps, and both refuse to be explained away completely. Some say coincidence, some say imagination, but others say this. Perhaps these stones are not the full story. Perhaps they are only the beginning. Perhaps there were more carvings lost to weather, buried beneath forest or field. Perhaps there were messages meant only for those who would understand. Perhaps we are not meant to find all the answers, but simply to notice, to feel, to wonder. For it is in the act of wondering that history breathes again. And so, as you rest now, picture those distant travelers. Men in cloaks, in armor, with symbols stitched into their sleeves, holding tools not of war, but of memory, kneeling before a fallen comrade or before a stone that will outlive them all, carving carefully, silently, knowing that no one may see, but hoping someone might. Or imagine the Norsemen, deep in the forests of Minnesota, carving their sorrow into a slab of stone as they buried their companions. Alone, far from home, asking only for mercy from a god they carried across oceans. These stories are not written in books, they are written in stone. And sometimes that is enough. Hufffoot Native American legends and old world symbols. There are some stories that do not live in books. They live in breath, in the hush between firelight and sleep, in the spaces where elders gather and children listen. These stories do not come with dates or footnotes. They come with rhythm, with meaning passed through generations like a sacred thread. And among the ancient peoples of North America, such stories have long spoken of strangers, visitors, who came not to conquer, but to share, to observe, to disappear. Tonight, we listen for those echoes. For long before European flags were planted in soil, long before maps named rivers and coastlines, long before towers were raised and borders were drawn, people lived here. Ancient, rooted, wise. People who watched the sky, who knew the wind, who carved the stories of the stars into rock and skin and song. And among those people were stories of others who came from the sea. Across the Great Lakes, through the woodlands and along the Atlantic coast, there are whispered tales rare, fragmented, and wrapped in metaphor. Stories of men with pale faces and metal clothing, of ships with wings that moved without oar or paddle, of symbols not drawn from nature, but from something more foreign, more geometric crosses, wheels and stars in patterns never seen before. Some spoke of visitors who came and taught the making of tools, the working of stone, the planting of strange crops. Others told of allies, of peace offerings, of shared knowledge, and then, just as suddenly, of their disappearance. In some versions, they are remembered as gods, in others as brothers, in still others as warnings beings whose return might signal change, for better or for worse. Could these tales refer to the Templars? Could the survivors of the lost fleet, or the descendants of those who crossed the sea with Prince Henry Sinclair, have made contact with Native American tribes, exchanging not only goods, but knowledge? There is no proof, no scroll, no signed document to say yes, but the clues are there, scattered like old leaves across a forest floor. In the American Southwest, among the petroglyphs carved into Red Canyon walls, there are shapes that resemble medieval crosses, not the Christian crucifix, but the equal-armed cross of ancient Europe. Some are surrounded by sunbursts, by spirals, by strange combinations that seem almost to blend old-world symbology with indigenous cosmology. And while mainstream archaeologists caution against interpretation, others see in these images a moment of contacto, meeting of minds across oceans and cultures. In the Northeast, stories from Algonquin-speaking peoples tell of bearded men arriving in large wooden canoes. They came, they say, not with violence, but with symbols, with maps, with knowledge of the heavens. One legend even speaks of a group who built a tower of stone, then vanished before winter came. And in the Midwestern plains, among the Dakota and Ojibwe, stories persist of stone tablets buried deep in the earth, marked with writing no elder could read. Some tribes passed them down as sacred, others feared them. But all acknowledged they came from those who were not born here. More than the physical, though, it is the symbolic that endures. There is the idea that the Templars, if they did arrive, did not impose, but listened, that they did not seek to build empires, but to preserve something sacred. And in the wisdom of native peoples, they may have found a kindred spirit, a people who lived not for dominance, but for balance, who honored the land, who saw the sacred in the everyday. Some theorists go further. They suggest that certain values found later in Freemasonry, an institution believed by some to inherit the secret traditions of the Templar Secco native philosophies. The circle of equality, the reverence for light, the compass and square. Could it be that something subtle was exchanged in those long-forgotten encounters? Not just tools or survival tips, but worldviews. We will never know for certain, and yet we must not underestimate the power of silence. For many native tribes, knowledge is not shared as loud proclamation. It is offered gently, through story, through ritual, through knowing when to speak and when not to. If the Templars came, and if they were accepted, even briefly, it would not be surprising that those memories were folded into myth, hidden in metaphor, and passed on only to those ready to understand. In some traditions, it is said that the most important truths are the ones that cannot be spoken directly. They must be felt, dreamed, lived. Perhaps that is how we should approach these tales, not to demand evidence, but to listen for the resonance, to feel the old world and the new world touching, not in war, but in curiosity, in reverence. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the scene. A campfire flickers beneath tall trees. The air is cold, but not unkind. Around the fire sit two groups of people, one clad in furs and beads, the other in cloaks and wool. They do not speak the same language, not yet, but they share bread. They share signs. One man draws a star on the ground. Another draws a circle. A third draws a cross. They nod. They do not understand everything, but they understand enough. Above them, the stars wheel across the sky, as they have done for thousands of years. There is no history book for this moment, no parchment, no witness. But perhaps it happened, or something like it, and perhaps that moment was enough. For sometimes the most powerful legacy is not what is built, but what is remembered, and memory, like stone, endures. 6. Freemasonry and the American founding. There are doors in history that do not open with keys. They open with symbols, quiet ones, etched in stone, engraved in metal, hidden in architecture, or sewn into the lining of a coat. Symbols that do not shout, but wait for eyes that notice, for minds that remember. And in the story of America, such symbols are everywhere. They are carved into the cornerstone of the Capitol, printed on the back of the dollar bill, aligned in the angles of the streets of Washington, D.C., and whispered in the names of men who built not only a nation, but a mystery alongside it. Tonight, we follow that mystery, one that leads from ancient orders across seas and centuries into the very heart of the American experiment, a mystery of legacy, secrecy, and quiet inheritance. It begins not in 1776, but long before. After the fall of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, their legacy did not vanish. It changed form. It moved underground. Some say the surviving members of the order went into hiding, merging with guilds of stonemasons, adopting the tools and language of architecture as a mask for deeper truths. In time, these guilds evolved into something else, something more symbolic than structural, more philosophical than physical. They called themselves Freemasons. The transition from stoneworkers to thinkers was gradual, spanning generations. But by the 17th and 18th centuries, Freemasonry had become a society of initiatesmen, bound not by blood or title, but by ritual, by allegory, by belief in a system of ethics drawn from ancient sources. Their temples were not built of marble, but of meaning. Their tools, the square, the compass, the level, were not just for measurement, but for reflection. And within these lodges, ideas were born, ideas about freedom, about brotherhood, about light and truth and self-mastery. Ideas that, in time, would find fertile ground across the Atlantic. For many of the men who shaped the United States were Freemasons: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, each a man of the Enlightenment, each a man of the Lodge. And in their hands, the founding of a nation was not only a political act, but a philosophical one. They did not merely draft a constitution, they designed a symbol, a republic of ideals. And hidden within that symbol were echoes of older orders. Templar echoes. The layout of Washington, D.C., designed by Pierre L'Enfant, has long invited speculation. Wide avenues radiating from central circles, alignments with celestial events, buildings positioned with almost ritual precision. Was it just planning, or was it a blueprint of belief? On the dollar bill, we find the Great Seal. On one side, an eagle bold, proud, reaching for unity and peace. But on the other, something older. A pyramid, unfinished, topped with an eye, the all-seeing eye, encircled with Latin, annuit coeptis, he has favored our undertakings, and below it, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. To some, these are just patriotic flourishes. To others, they are markers of a hidden thread, a lineage that runs through the Templars, through the Masons, into the fabric of America itself. The idea is not that Freemasons were simply Templars in disguise. Rather, that they carried a spark, the same spark. A belief in liberty, in the sanctity of the individual, in a higher order that transcends kings and crowns. And that belief, refined through ritual and symbol, helped guide the hands that signed the Declaration and laid the first stones of a new capital. Even the architecture tells the tale. In Philadelphia, In Boston, in Richmond and Charleston, Masonic lodges stand as quiet sentinels, not ostentatious, but deliberate, often filled with artwork that references Solomon's Temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and yes, Templar iconography. Crosses, stars, keys, and swords. In some Freemasonic rites, the story of the Templars is remembered directly. The York Rite, for example, includes a degree called Knight Templar. In this symbolic journey, the initiate passes through stages of moral and spiritual testing, invoking the courage and sacrifice of the old order. Whether literal or allegorical, the thread remains. What is perhaps most striking is the way the ideals of Freemasonry, tolerance, reason, virtue, balance, found their way into the American ethos. This was not a nation built by conquest alone. It was built on principles: freedom of belief, equality before the law, the pursuit of light, and light, in Masonic tradition, is more than illumination. It is truth. It is awakening. It is the journey from ignorance to understanding. So we ask, did the Freemasons carry the Templar flame into America? Were they heirs or were they seekers, just as the Templars were? And if so, what were they seeking? Some say the Holy Grail was never a cup, that it was a truth, a wisdom, a way of living. And if that's true, then perhaps it was hidden not beneath the earth, but in plain sight, in symbols, in rituals, in laws, in a city plan, in a dream of a republic. Tonight, let your thoughts drift over time. Picture a room in an old stone building, lit only by candlelight. Men gathered, hands over hearts, taking oaths not of loyalty to king or flag, but to each other. Vows of honor, of secrecy, of service. On the wall a symbol, a compass, a sword, a sun. Now picture a new land. Forests stretching to the horizon, rivers waiting to be named. And among them, settlers arrive not just with wagons and weapons, but with symbols. They build not only homes, but lodges. They draw lines not only on maps, but on principles. In this way, perhaps, the old world did not vanish. It transformed, and in America, something ancient found new soil. Whether or not the Freemasons were Templars in new clothing may never be proven, but their values so strikingly similar live on, in stone and star, in law and legend, in the quiet corners of old buildings and the bold declarations of a young nation. Let that be the dream tonight, that something sacred crossed the sea, survived the fire, and whispered itself into the foundation of a new world. And that, perhaps, without even knowing, we walk among symbols, still watching, still guiding. 7. Skepticism and alternative explanations. There comes a moment in every story, no matter how beautiful, no matter how ancient, when a quieter voice begins to speak. It does not interrupt, it does not deny, but it asks, gently, patiently, what is true, and what is imagined, what is remembered, and what is wished for. Tonight, we listen to that voice. For all the legends, the whispers, the symbols carved in stone, for every cross on a boulder, for every tale of lost fleets and hidden temples, there are those who remain unconvinced. Scholars, historians, archaeologists, skeptics, people who walk slowly through museums and libraries, who follow the footnotes, who demand the primary source. And they ask fair questions. Where is the evidence? Where are the coins, the manuscripts, the shipwrecks, the DNA? Why, they ask, if the Templars sailed to America, is there no clear record, no direct proof? Why are we left only with shadows? And in truth, these are not enemies of the story. They are part of it. For doubt is not destruction. It is the invitation to look. Again, more closely, more clearly, to separate the story from the storyteller, to explore the boundary between memory and myth. Take the Newport Tower, for example. Architects have studied it. They've compared its mortar to other colonial buildings. They've traced its stonework to construction methods known in 17th century New England. And yes, Governor Benedict Arnold did mention a stone-built windmill in his will. To the skeptic, this is enough. The tower is colonial, practical, not a temple, not a sign, and the Kensington runestone. Linguists point to runes that don't appear in medieval inscriptions. They argue that the grammar is flawed, the syntax modern, the phrases suspiciously close to 19th century Scandinavian speech. Could a humble Minnesota farmer in 1898 have forged such a thing? Possibly. Was it a hoax, a joke, a plea for attention? Perhaps. Even the Westford Knight, with its carved figure on a stone ledge, has been examined and questioned. Geologists suggest the markings are natural striations, enhanced over time by well-meaning believers with chalk and hope. The line between recognition and projection is thin, and then there's the Templar fleet. Records do show that La Rochelle was a port used by the Order, but where is the ship log, the destination manifest, the eyewitness? Could the fleet have simply been relocated, or captured in secret, or dismantled before the arrests? The absence of documentation is not proof of escape. It's just silence. So the skeptic asks softly, reasonably, are we building castles in the fog? And yet, even among skeptics, there is room for curiosity, for possibility, for the unexplainable. Because sometimes history forgets. Documents burn, maps fade, monasteries collapse. Stories are told, then buried, and in those silences, other things survive. Symbols, names, hunches, echoes, just enough to make us wonder. And wonder is where belief begins, not blind belief, not dogma, but the kind of belief that walks alongside evidence, not in place of it. The kind that asks, not declares. The kind that opens a window and lets in light, even if the room remains dim. The skeptic and the seeker are not opposites. They are companions on the same path. One carries questions, the other carries hope. And between them, the story lives. Perhaps the Newport Tower is just a windmill. Perhaps the runestone is a forgery. Perhaps the Templars never sailed west. Perhaps. But still, the symbols remain. Still, the tower stands. Still, the stone whispers. And still, people dream. And there is value in that, in the dreaming, in the listening, in the slow, steady turning of the mind toward the past, not to rewrite it, but to feel it again, to ask what we might have missed. For even if the Templars did not reach America, the idea that they could have changes us. It reminds us that history is not fixed, it is fragile, alive, that stories matter, even when they leave no fingerprints. That meaning can be carried not only in facts, but in symbols, in intention, in belief. So let the skeptics speak. Let them hold the torch and examine the stone. But let the dreamer stay too. Let them trace the symbol. Let them walk the forest path where no road lies. Let them close their eyes and see a ship's sail on the horizon. In the end, history belongs to both, and tonight, so does this story. 8 legacy and lingering questions. And so we arrive at the edge of the map, not a border drawn in ink, but a quiet place where story gives way to silence, where history ends and myth begins, or perhaps where they meet and speak in whispers. All the way through this journey, we have followed echoes, nights and ships, towers and stones, symbols and stories. But what remains? What stays long after the details fade? Legacy. It is not always built in marble or written in parchment. Sometimes it settles into the world like mist, soft, lingering, shifting with light. And the legacy of the Templars, Whether they reach the shores of America or not is such a mist. It has found its way into architecture, into symbols, into the names of towns and streets, into stories passed down over fires, between generations. It lives in the questions we ask, and it lives in the feeling that maybe, just maybe, something deeper lies beneath the world we see. That feeling is not proof, but it is presence. Think of it like a thread stretched across centuries, not visible unless caught in a certain light at a certain angle. And yet it holds, from the Templars in Jerusalem to Freemasons in Virginia, from carved crosses on rocks in New England to a pyramid with an eye above it, printed on every dollar bill, from a round tower in Rhode Island to a stone slab in Minnesota. Separate pieces, scattered but together, they hum, quietly, as if remembering something we've forgotten. What if the real journey was never about reaching a shore, but about carrying an idea? The Templars were more than warriors. They were guardians. Of relics, yes, but also of principles, of light in dark places, of structure within chaos, of devotion that lived quietly beside doubt. And if that light was carried across the ocean not in the hold of a ship, but in the hearts of men, then maybe it didn't need to be buried. Maybe it was meant to be shared. Some say the Holy Grail was never a cup, but a truth, a way of living, a kind of inner discipline, a harmony between body, mind, and soul. And if that's true, then perhaps the Grail was never hidden beneath stone or guarded by swords, but passed on, generation by generation, quietly transforming the world from within. America, as a nation, was born in an upheaval, but also in vision. It was not only a fight for land, but for ideals, liberty, brotherhood, a belief that each human being carries something sacred. And whether by accident or design, those values mirror the very ones the Templars once vowed to protect. Was that influence direct? Was it the result of secret orders, of whispered rites and hidden maps? Perhaps, or perhaps it was something subtler, a current beneath the surface, a seed planted in distant soil, a memory passed not through blood, but through meaning. In the end, we may never know the full truth. The stone will not speak, the sea will not return its dead. And time, ever patient, keeps its secrets well. But that does not mean we must stop seeking, for sometimes the search itself is sacred. To wonder, to imagine, to follow a trail, even if it fades. That is the legacy too. It teaches us that history is not a chain, but a constellation. We trace it not with answers, but with attention. We connect the stars in ways that feel right to the heart, even when the mind hesitates. And in that tracing, we see not just the past, but ourselves. So as you drift now, as the stars gather beyond your window and the world grows quiet, let yourself feel the presence of the question, not as something to solve, but as something to hold. Did the Templars come to America? Did they build towers and leave carvings? Did they share secrets with those who lived here long before? We do not know, but they left something. Not in vaults, but in stories. Not in monuments, but in meaning. And if you've listened this far, if your heart stirred even once, then perhaps that legacy has already reached you. Let it settle now, like dust on old stone. Let it hum in the background of your dreams. Let the past remain alive, not in certainty, but in wonder. And in the stillness of sleep, as your breath slows and your thoughts become stars, remember, the journey is not over. The mystery is not solved, but the story continues. Thank you for journeying with us tonight. If this story stirred your curiosity, if it awakened a question or offered a moment of stillness in your day, we invite you to return. There are always more paths to follow, more symbols to see, more whispers waiting in the pages of forgotten time. If you found comfort in this telling, Feel free to leave a like, a comment, a quiet presence among the echoes, and if you wish to travel further, consider subscribing, so that the next time history calls, gently and softly, you'll be there to hear it. Until then, rest well, dream deep, and may your night be filled with wonder. Good night.